Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme. So, Caroline, it's another week of firsts for Keir Starmer. Today marks his first Prime Minister's questions in the hot seat, and he held his first reception for business leaders at Downing Street yesterday evening. Let's welcome, perhaps, though, his first rebellion in Parliament.
Yeah, that came in the form of 7 MPs voting against the government and for an SNP motion calling for an end to the 2-child limit on universal credit and tax credits. Now, those 7 MPs include the former shadow ministers Rebecca Long-Bailey and John McDonnell. A number of others abstained, and 19 other Labour MPs signed another amendment also calling for an end to that cap. So the rebellion was relatively small, but it's clear that the Labour whips really wanted to fire a warning shot.
Yeah, what struck me is it's not entirely about policy. Starmer's repeated the government would not make unfunded promises by scrapping the cap, but the desire to tackle child poverty did feature heavily in Labour's manifesto. Some MPs have said they're hoping for progress in Rachel Reeves' first budget in September, though, with the bills piling up on the doormat of number 11 Downing Street. I think an early scrapping of the cap is pretty unlikely.
No, absolutely. I mean, so for Keir Starmer, is it about discipline, making an example of the rebels, showing that disobedience will not be tolerated? Obviously, Labour has more MPs to manage. Maybe Starmer wants to set that tone as he hopes, of course, for 2 terms in office. Or maybe it's also just learning the lessons from the Tories when it comes to damaging rebellions, kind of squashing them early.
Yeah, well, let's put some of these questions to our political editor, Alex Wickham, who's joined us in the studio today. Alex, this was pretty brutal, wasn't it? Pretty heavy-handed. What's the message being sent by Starmer? I mean, he could have dealt with this in a different way, couldn't he?
He could, and I think if you talk to people in number 10, their argument is, look, we're okay with dissent. We're okay with ideas from our party about how we should be doing things. We don't expect everybody to agree on everything, but this is a bit different. There are 7 or so MPs here on the proper left of the Labour Party, the sort of Corbynite left. And number 10 would say, look, are these MPs really trying to push us in a bit more of a quicker direction on getting rid of the 2-child benefit, or are they trying to undermine the government? And they see the Corbynite left as trying to campaign against the Labour government and undermine the Prime Minister and essentially, get revenge, as they see it, on an internal factional squabble in the Labour Party. And that's why they've taken this very tough approach.
Do you think they'll be pleased that it was only 7 and that they are kind of the usual suspects?
Definitely. And, if this had spread to really MPs that aren't in that really core left-wing group, then there certainly wouldn't have been suspended with a whip from all of them. They'd have had to deal with it in a different way. And they managed to, the vast majority of Labour MPs want to lift the 2-child benefit cap. Probably Keir Starmer does. I'm sure he probably will at some point in this Parliament when he can. It might not happen as quickly as the left wants, but everybody in the Labour Party expects it to happen at some point. The reality is, there is politics at play here, and there has been for years these factional battles going on in Labour, and that's what really this was about.
Yeah, okay, so factions, political capital. Having said that, the other argument would be that actually lifting the 2-child cap is not very expensive, so they could do it.
It is not impossible for the Chancellor to find $3 billion down the back of the sofa to fund this. The problem for Rachel Reeves is she has got 5, 6, 7, 8 things that cost $3 billion that people want her to do, and that all adds up. And she might be able to prioritise one of them, but then there is also defence spending, which needs to hit 2.5% of GDP at some point, according to Labour's manifesto. There's various other problems with the country that the new Labour government, tells us about every day that need money, and child poverty is obviously going to be a major priority for a Labour government. They've set up this task force last week to try to convince MPs that they'll take it seriously. You hear lots of MPs saying, what's the point of there being a Labour government if they don't do anything about child poverty? And of course, I'm sure Keir Starmer is going to do something on child poverty and lift the cap, get rid of the cap eventually. And these are really tough political decisions for Rachel Reeves. She can find $3 billion, but is it going to go on this or is it going to go on something else?
There is a political positioning question, though, isn't there? If Labour wants to park its tanks on the centre ground and get that Tory territory, increasing the benefits bill, relaxing a benefits cap, which is something which it should be said is unpopular with quite a lot of people, that does send a certain message, doesn't it? And I think that will probably be in Keir Starmer's mind, won't it?
Absolutely. And you know, again, the politics at play, you hear often from Starmer's advisors that the first couple of years at least, or of this government, they need to hold the centre ground, push the Tories further to the right, make sure that Labour is the party of the middle ground voter, and not lurch to the left immediately and increase spending and increase taxes and like I say, increase the welfare bill or on other social issues. And that's why you've heard lots of quite punchy rhetoric on things like immigration and crime as well in the first few weeks. You know, he's had a big fight with the far left of his party. He's quite happy to do this, Keir Starmer, because it cements him in the middle ground. Now, throughout the 5-year term, he is going to come under pressure, and it isn't just from the Corbyn left, it's from his own cabinet, from people saying, come on, you need to do a bit more, you need to give us some more Labour policies here that actually, you know, are a bit more ambitious. And that is where the tension really is going to come.
Okay. The benefit cap, though, is quite a small issue. As you say, there are other bigger policies that are emerging. And surely the tank of US presidential politics is the next. How are Labour preparing now that it does look like it's Kamala Harris v Donald Trump?
You know, publicly they'll tell you their line is that they would work with whoever's in the White House and special relationship and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Privately, of course, they don't want Donald Trump to win. They're terrified of that idea. Most European governments are, and they want Kamala Harris to win. Now, you know, David Lammy has, the Foreign Secretary, made an effort to reach out to Republicans and MAGA Republicans, people like J.D. Vance, over the last few months. We'll see where has that got him. We've seen comments by Trump's Vice President Pick, you know, pretty disparaging about Britain in the last couple of weeks. So that's left David Lammy with a little bit of egg on his face. But, you know, they will try. And David Lammy has this quite nice line whenever everybody brings up his old tweets laying into Donald Trump. He goes, well, it's, you know, you should see what his own side have said about him and indeed what J.D. Vance has said about him, which is true. But obviously, if Trump wins, that is going to be a huge problem. And it's something Labour are acutely aware of.
So leaving aside the preparations for a possible return of Donald Trump, what are some of the other domestic issues which could cause problems for the government over the coming weeks and months?
You know, it will be really interesting to see whether this sort of squabble that he's had with the left of his party keeps going. Can he basically crush the left, nip it in the bud now? The sort of the continuity Corbyn people, can he sort of just get rid of them and they disappear as a problem, or does it give them? You know, he's made them into a story, and if you actually speak to some of those Corbynista people today, they're pretty happy with how things have gone, even if they might have had the whip suspended. They've become relevant again. They're in news headlines, and journalists are ringing them up asking them what they think about things, which hasn't been really happening over the last couple of years. So if that can bubble up, we've seen in the actual election result, of course, the rise of the Green Party and some independents on issues like Israel-Gaza, which is going to continue, you'd imagine, to be a major issue over the next few months. If there was to be further problems there, that is going to put Starmer in a very difficult political situation.
Yeah, absolutely, because, of course, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is addressing a joint session of Congress tomorrow, in fact, in the United States. Alex, thank you so much for being with us. That is Bloomberg's political editor, Alex Wickham.
Well, let's get an inside view now on the government's response to all of this. Sam White was Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer when he was Leader of the Opposition, and he was also an advisor to Labour Chancellor Alistair Darling. Sam, thanks for joining us on the show today. Were you surprised by the severe nature of this response to this rebellion?
I think a lot of people go into politics to do things like reduce child poverty. I think the actual introduction of the policy by the last government was pretty shameful. But the facts that people haven't caught up with yet is quite how bad the inheritance this new government is trying to manage, and how big the backlog of problems is, from crumbling schools to public sector pay to compensation for various scandals. There's an awful lot this government will want to fix when resources allow. But what you can't do is, at the very first test of credibility, expect Rachel Reeves to whip off her mask as a sort of Mission Impossible style moment and say, ha, it's me, Liz Truss, the whole time. And, I'm prepared to pretend there's money there when there isn't.
OK, but is this really about money? It's only about £3 billion. Or is this about a message, a clear message to now this very large cohort of MPs on discipline and on the left of the party?
To my mind, this is about money, and it's about fiscal credibility, and it's about signalling what kind of whether this government is going to be easy to push into taking sort of Liz Truss style decisions of unfunded funding announcements, or whether it's going to be one that actually gets down to the serious business of governing and taking difficult decisions and not pretending things are easier than they are. Growth is essential to fix the fiscal problems, to improve living standards, to fix public services, and is part of how Rachel and Keir will ultimately reduce child poverty in the UK, because I have no doubt this government, like the last Labour government, will reduce child poverty as opposed to rising child poverty as we saw in the last Tory government. So this is not a question of will they do something about child poverty. They've already announced a strategy, and I'm confident they will. It's a question of, do you buckle and pretend there's money there that isn't there at the first sign of trouble, or do you demonstrate you're serious?
Sam, you've listed the many things which the government would like to spend money on, not least the public sector pay bill, which could be potentially an extra £10 billion. Clearly, there isn't money for all of these things, and that's even if we look out 2 or 3 years into the future. I noticed Alan Milburn has popped up in the Times saying that long-term sick should be forced to seek work, flying the flag for welfare reform. What do you think Labour's approach is going to be to tackling the welfare bill? Are they going to be tough on welfare claimants in the same way that the Tories were?
No, I don't think they'll do it in the same way as the Tories were. I think if you look at the way the Labour manifesto talks about this, it's about creating the sort of right pathways to work and incentives to work and making the system fairer, but also encouraging people, if they can work, to work. And I think that is expected of by the public, especially those who go out and work every day, that benefits are there for when they're needed, but they're not an alternative lifestyle. Now, I don't think the Labour government will do it in the same way as the Tory government. I think there was quite a lot of performative stuff under the last government, even attempts to set traps for the Labour government by doing some quite unpalatable things, often like the 2-child limit, which targets some of the poorer families. I don't think that's going to be Labour's approach. I think you're going to see a more sophisticated anti-child poverty strategy that also encourages people into work.
Okay. I'm interested to understand, you also were there as an advisor to the former Chancellor Alistair Darling, of course, who was Chancellor in the UK during the financial crisis, 2007 to 2008. Now, after his death, for example, he was hailed as one of the great chancellors of the UK. I wonder what parallels you see between Alistair Darling and Rachel Reeves now, and also the great issue that the UK and the US both face after that financial crisis, which is that incomes have not gone up really materially since then. And this has been the deep challenge to democracy, frankly, and remains so in the UK.
Yeah, I think there's several good points there. I mean, first of all, I think Alistair was one of the great chancellors. I think the global financial crisis had a lot of the same hallmarks as a Great Depression-style event, but the willingness of the government to step in and stabilise the banking system and then to prevent the recession turning into a depression was one of the great decisions, economic decisions of the last 50 years. Yes, it left a deficit, and there was always a plan to deal with that. In terms of Alistair and Rachel, the last time I saw Alistair alive, we were in his back garden talking, and I knew he was ill, and he reminded me that I had once forced him to go on a visit in Leeds when he was doing an official visit, and I said, Alistair, you have to do a political visit on the end of this to go and meet a really talented up-and-coming politician in Leeds West. And he said, I was really grumpy with you at the time. It was the last thing I wanted to do, but you said, no, this one's worth it. And that was the first time he met Rachel Reeves. And he went on to be a mentor to her over a decade. And I think he saw her as the most talented politician of this next generation. And I think he's right. In terms of populism, I think there is a real issue here. Living standards have, real wages have not improved from 2008. We've had, a decade and a half without real increases. The last parliament being some of the worst, where we had the first time in history that people are poorer at the end of a parliament than they are at the start of a parliament. And I think this does drive people towards populist solutions and, snake oil salesmen offering easy answers to difficult questions. And this is the great challenge for this government. It's to show some progress early on, that things can be done. Don't abandon all hope. Things will get better. But ensure the public understands that this is a decade of renewal, and they need to give the government the time to get the investment flowing, the productivity up, the growth going, so that life can improve again. Because if they cut this short and fall for the snake oil salesman and the promises you can snap your fingers and 10 prisons will magically appear, or waiting lists will magically disappear in 2 years, if they fall for those fake promises, we risk going down the slippery path of populism where we only accelerate our decline.
One of the things which Alistair Darling and indeed Gordon Brown as Chancellor had, which was a very decent fiscal inheritance, wasn't it? There was money to spend certainly a couple of years into that last Labour government. That is probably not going to be the case this time, is it? Do you worry about that slide to populism in a few years' time as we head towards the next election?
I do worry that it is more difficult to fix the problems with no money. If you look at sort of 1997, you're absolutely right. It was a better economic inheritance. The economy was kind of humming along quite nicely. Public services, on the other hand, were in a very bad state in 97. So the big challenge there was clear. It was some redistribution, it was continuing the growth, and it was fixed public services. If you look at 2010, when government changed then, it was a different situation. The deficit, as I mentioned a moment ago, was around 10%, which is high and needed to be addressed. But the public services have never been better. Highest level of public satisfaction, lowest waiting lists ever. What we've got this time is uniquely bad, and why I think it is certainly the worst in my lifetime, if not, since the Second World War, that you have both an economy in not great shape, public finances, 100% debt GDP ratio, deficit of 4-5% still, living standards fallen over the parliament, and normally when you've had a high borrowing and high tax in government, you have minty public services. In this instance, we have public services in probably the worst state they have been in my lifetime, and you have all the problems at the same time, and that is very difficult, which is why I think, going back to where we started in this conversation, Rachel and others have to show that they are serious about fixing the public finances, the economy, getting growth going, and they're not going to be pushed into making Liz Truss-style promises that there's money there when there isn't.
Sam, thank you so much for being with us. It's been so interesting to hear your views. Sam White was the Chief of Staff for Keir Starmer when he was the leader of the opposition and advisor to the Labour Chancellor, former Labour Chancellor, of course, Alistair Darling. He spent also all of those years under Gordon Brown leading the Treasury, and so also his impact was very, very significant. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, a really tricky fiscal situation for the government. I wanted to end the show, though, with a bit of welcome news on the economy. Latest data shows that both manufacturing and services are expanding. The closely watched Purchasing Managers Index survey shows new business growing at the fastest rate in 15 months, and hiring is at its strongest in more than a year.
That is interesting. And yes, some additional good economic news then for the government, of course, that still faces so many challenges. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. Give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo, and our audio engineer was Sean Costamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.